Welcome back to Breakfast Central. Now let's update you that the Ecowas Authority of Heads of State and Government have reiterated its commitment to resist the proliferation of military takeovers in the West African sub-region. This was during the 64th Ordinary Session and Summit of the authority, which held in Nigeria's capital, Abuja, where members present vowed to protect democracy and condemn the deteriorating security situation being witnessed in several member states. Amadin Uyi tells us more in this report.
It is the 64th Ordinary Session of the Authority of Heads of State and Government of the Ecowas Subregion. In attendance are representatives of West African states, many of them led by their president.
This summit is taking place at a very significant moment in our sub-region. Not just in our region alone, but globally. We are confronted with the challenge of democratic consolidation, economic difficulties, climate change crisis, and food insecurity, among others.
President Bola Tinubu, who chairs the authority, emphasized the need for good governance and the rule of law among West African states as a catalyst for peace and prosperity.
As a people, we aspire to create a borderless, peaceful, prosperous, and cohesive region, but on good governance and the rule of law, where people will have the opportunity to realize their full potential for sustainable development.
The authority also took time to express worry over the security situation in several states of the sub-region.
Security in the region is the focal point, and we must achieve this regardless of other commitments.
The situation in Niger arguably remains the most concerning political security development, which has impacted peace and security in the Sahel with implications for the entire region.
The Authority of Heads of State and Governments have commended the elections, these successful elections, in Nigeria, Sierra Leone, and Liberia. In fact, the Authority of Heads of State and Government gave the Liberian President George Weah a standing ovation for conceding defeat. They also took time to condemn the violence in Guinea-Bissau and Sierra Leone, and also the proliferation of military takeovers in West Africa. They say this is taking its toll on citizens and has served as a veritable tool to destabilize the sub-region.
The standoff between the military leaders in Niger and several partners, particularly Ecowas, have significantly increased the challenges facing the populations of the country.
The message must go down clearly that we will support a democratically elected government, not unconstitutional exercises without let of hindrance. Democracy must win if we fight for it, and we will definitely fight for democracy.
Amadin Uyi, reporting for News Central.
Now we're joined by Global Affairs Analyst Collins Nweke. Good morning, and thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Liz. Thank you for having me.
All right. I'd like to find out what your thoughts are about the Ecowas Heads of State Summit. Is it something that I'm sure you followed up with it? Was it something you were excited about?
Well, there is hardly any reason to be excited about this summit. This is the 64th session. And I think it's a little bit depressing to hear all the speeches, which actually leads you to one and only one conclusion, and that is the fact that the leadership of Ecowas appears to be totally disconnected from the people of the region. Because when you hear them speak, they talk about, successful democratic exercise, handover of power from one democracy to the other, and so on and so forth. And they tend to ignore the fact that the vast majority of these elections are actually rigged. And that one of the reasons that these military officers leave their barracks and finding their ways increasingly to the government house is because they cannot stand the civilian coup d'etat that appears to be taking place across the entire Ecowas sub-region. Now, I believe that as long as they are not ready to face the reality by at least speaking out against some of these, obnoxious happenings, I believe that, they will continue to be unpopular. Now, that said, I must say that, there are very tiny signs that ECOWAS is now, ready to be a bit more proactive, just a little bit more proactive. Departing from that epitaph that they've had of being the toothless bulldog that bites but never bites. So it remains to be seen whether they will follow up on some of these actions and threats that emanated from the 64th session in Abuja, Nigeria.
Yeah, but the question really is how. If they choose to follow up. Remember what happened in Niger. They did bark a lot, but there was no bite, in the end. And it's pretty much the same that's happened in the last couple of years when we've seen coups in different countries. So is it also a risky idea, with the idea that ECOWAS is waking up and, might be willing to bite next time? Because we've continued to fear the expansion of insecurity challenges in different parts of the continent. If these coups happen and it turns out into a civil war or an invasion and stuff like that. So how can ECOWAS bite without creating more chaos for the continent?
ECOWAS will certainly bite by not putting forth military intervention as option number one. They did that in the beginning. I think they quickly realized, because the citizens of ECOWAS are getting more and more vocal, the civil society is increasingly waking up to their responsibilities and their roles. And so I believe that the barrage of criticisms against military intervention actually barred ECOWAS from taking that option. I must say that although that was catastrophic, they ought to be commended for at least listening to the voice of the people and are now towing other paths, which, like some of us have continued to say from the onset, is a diplomatic solution. So they started off, like I said, with a threat of military intervention, and then watered out a little bit down to, the release of the president unconditionally and restoring democratic order. And then when that isn't working, they are now talking about, the fact that they can release him to a third country and begin to plan for, transition. So more and more, you see them exploring as many other options as possible than military intervention. And they haven't ruled out that military intervention. And yes, no one can blame them for not ruling it out, because, when you go to, people who are used to force and who go by force, you go with the olive branch in one hand, but also the AK-47 on the other hand. So the military intervention threat remains that AK-47, and the diplomatic options, remain the olive branch. So to that extent, I believe that there is no easy way out of this, but continuation with diplomatic, solution, negotiating, is the way to go. And I believe they appear to be doing that now, more coordinated than previously. Notwithstanding the initial, error of starting off with a threat of military intervention.
But what would you say is the strength of the regional bloc's sanctions? Would you say that member states are afraid or should be scared when ECOWAS says it would impose sanctions? What is the strength of the sanction, and what is the strength of the ECOWAS as a body, to be able to ensure that they, see their oversight functions in all these countries, on the continent? So, first of all, I think it's, first of all, what is the strength of the sanctions, and what is the strength of the body, the ECOWAS itself?
Yeah. Sanctions in isolation definitely is not working. It hasn't worked, and no one can expect to see it work. Especially if you consider that some of the economic sanctions that had been put in place in the past actually go ahead to, in fact, disadvantage and impoverish the people of the region. Now, selective sanction has been seen to work and work well in a situation where the military juntas themselves are targeted, and selective sanctions that actually target them individually, the institutions as well, and those sort of selective, exercises, those ones are effective. And one will expect that, when they talk of economic sanctions, that they are able to rule out those ones that will, affect the population, which was the case in the past. Now, as a bloc, of course, the more the merrier. Sticking together, and when you hear, for instance, the chairman, Bola Tinubu of Nigeria, talking about a borderless, ECOWAS, strengthening of, economic integration, political integration, and all of that. Yes, we have seen examples with, regional blocks like the the EU, the European Union. We've seen how they form, a strength and work purposefully. I believe that, such are the strength of ECOWAS. But then they've got to go back to the drawing board and actually strengthen, their instruments, especially those instruments that are meant to act more proactively than acting in a reactive manner after, coup d'etat and other, vices have already taken place.
Does the current Nigerian president, of course, ECOWAS leader currently, do you think he has anything to prove in his time as ECOWAS chairman?
Well, I do think that, from his body language, he is very much keen to move ECOWAS to be more proactive than reactive. Now, it remains to be seen how exactly he, intends to do that, because there is also the issue of credibility hanging around him. Because the election that, brought him to power, even though the courts, the Supreme Court has ruled in his favor, remains very, very contentious and very, very unpopular, not only in Nigeria or Africa, but in the rest of the world. And so it is not, out of place to see people snare when he speaks. And I mean, the feeling is, look who is talking. So I don't know what he's going to do about that, because it is a major issue of credibility, listening to him and believing that he means what he's saying. But clearly, he appears to have a good intention in terms of helping to strengthen the regional bloc. But one other area that we have seen him actually done well in the past is that anywhere he goes, in all of these, shuttle diplomacy that he has undertaken since becoming Nigeria's president, whenever he's talking for Nigeria, he's also talking for the region. For instance, in the area of the unfair treatment of Africa in existing international treaties that leave them high and dry in the area of unfair tariffs, and the need to take them off as a way of ensuring that fair trade actually takes place. You heard him also talk about climate change and the fact that the entire Africa, not just Nigeria, have been disadvantaged because the polluters pay less, and so when the polluters want the climate change to happen, they should be able to pay the bills. And so far, I think there have been success in at least pledging to channel quite some mediation resources into Nigeria and Africa region. So to that extent, he appears to be on the right track, but a lot still needs to be done.
All right, let's talk about ECOWAS and the credibility that they seem to have lost. Some would argue that they've lost credibility, not just on the African continent, but even in the eyes of the West. You've also mentioned how some of the challenges with taking the ECOWAS seriously would revolve around how they are talking about the challenges in Niger and the coup in these other countries, forgetting that some of these elections were fraudulent. So what would you say are some of the measures that ECOWAS will need to take to sanitize its reputation in the eyes of not just Africans, but also the West?
I will just give one example to illustrate what I believe that ECOWAS ought to be doing, and in fact, what they should be doing going forward. And I will, focus my example on Nigeria. Now, it was clear that when the primaries for elections in Nigeria were taking place, that some very, very illegal, and I'm really talking, I'm minding my words very carefully, very, very illegal practices took place in terms of vote buying that actually turned out some of the presidential candidates. Now, ECOWAS not speaking out and stepping up at that particular stage, which in my books is acting proactively, but at least making them know, making it very, very clear that they are ready to act in areas of that nature, actually is a way to start. You don't wait until it is too late before you begin to talk from both sides of your mouth. Yes, I do understand that they have some, institutional issues around that because, they cannot be seen to be intervening in the political processes of a sovereign nation that happens to be an ECOWAS member. But they made that law, and they can actually show signs that they have tied their hands, but they now need to untie their hands to enable them step in when they ought to do. But if they truly want to step in, even under the current dispensation, there are legitimate ways and means of doing that quite indirectly. So with that example, I simply want to illustrate that ECOWAS can be more proactive rather than reactive. And I believe that if they do that, they will be able to, prevent at least some of these practices that lead to civilian coup d'etat that is actually tearing the continent, at least the, the sub-region of West Africa apart.
Well, proactive or reactive, I think there's also importance of fixing their reputation, and the way that citizens across the continent see ECOWAS. So maybe it would give them some credibility when they want to take actions. Because I know that they were heavily criticized when Niger happened. People said that they were being the lapdogs of France and the West at that time, not acting on Africa's interest. But we'll see, how far these discussions go and see how Niger in particular turns out. Collins Wiki, we always enjoy speaking with you. Thank you very much for joining us this morning.
Always a pleasure. Enjoy the rest of the week.
You as well.